There is a strange irony hiding inside the world's most recognizable soft drink. Today, Coca-Cola is associated with happiness, family dinners, birthday parties, fast food, summer afternoons, and a glass filled with ice. But Coca-Cola was not born as an ordinary soft drink. Its creator was trying to solve a problem. And the first version of the drink was created in a world where alcohol was being pushed out of American life, patent medicines were everywhere, cocaine was being promoted as a medical substance, and pharmacists could sell products that promised to cure almost anything. The drink that eventually became one of the most powerful brands on earth began in the middle of all of this, and for a brief moment, its predecessor was caught on the wrong side of the law. Because before Coca-Cola became Coca-Cola, its creator had already made another drink. It contained wine. It was marketed as a medicinal tonic, and when Prohibition threatened to shut it down, John Pemberton had a problem. He needed to create something that could survive without alcohol. What he came up with would become Coca-Cola. But that was only the beginning, because the strange story of Coca-Cola is not really the story of a recipe. It is the story of how a pharmacist's experiment became a business, how advertising became more important than the drink itself, how a secret formula became a legend, how a bottle became an icon, and how one beverage learned to sell something much larger than refreshment. It learned to sell a feeling. And once Coca-Cola figured that out, the world would never look at a soft drink the same way again. The story begins in Atlanta, Georgia, May 8, 1886. The American Civil War was barely 2 decades in the past. The country was changing rapidly. Railroads were expanding, cities were growing, new industries were transforming everyday life. And in Atlanta, a pharmacist named John Stith Pemberton was working on something of his own. Pemberton was not simply a pharmacist interested in making pleasant drinks. He was a businessman in an age obsessed with patent medicines. At the time, Americans purchased countless remedies promising relief from headaches, nervousness, fatigue, stomach problems, and almost everything else. There were few modern regulations standing between a manufacturer and a dramatic medical claim, and Pemberton understood the opportunity. But his own story was complicated. During the Civil War, Pemberton had been wounded. Like many people suffering from severe injuries at the time, he eventually became dependent on morphine. That experience helped push his attention towards substances that were being promoted as possible treatments for addiction and other ailments. One of those substances was coca. Coca leaves contained cocaine, a substance that 19th century physicians and pharmacists did not yet understand in the way we do today. Cocaine was legally available and was being discussed in medical circles as a stimulant and possible treatment for various conditions. Pemberton was interested, and there was already a famous example of a coca-based drink. In Europe, Angelo Mariani had created Vin Mariani, a wine infused with coca leaves. It became enormously popular. Pemberton saw the commercial potential, so in 1885 he introduced his own version. It was called Pemberton's French Wine Coca. It was an alcoholic beverage marketed as a nerve tonic and medicinal product. And for a while, that was the business. But then Atlanta changed the rules. In 1885, Fulton County passed a prohibition measure restricting alcohol. Suddenly, Pemberton's alcoholic tonic had a problem. The drink could no longer simply continue as before. And this is where the history of Coca-Cola takes one of its most important turns. Pemberton needed a non-alcoholic alternative. The solution would not be to abandon the basic idea, it would be to transform it. Instead of wine, there would be a syrup. Instead of an alcoholic medicinal beverage, there would be a carbonated fountain drink. And somewhere inside that transformation was the beginning of Coca-Cola. The first Coca-Cola was served in Atlanta on May 8, 1886. Pemberton carried a jug of his new syrup to Jacob's Pharmacy. There, the syrup was mixed with carbonated water. The result was poured into a glass, and for 5 cents, customers could try the new drink. According to Coca-Cola's own historical account, only about 9 drinks were sold per day during the first year. 9. That is an almost comically small beginning for a product that would eventually become one of the world's most recognizable brands. There was no global empire, no giant factory, no television campaign, no famous red trucks. Just a pharmacist, a syrup, a soda fountain, and a handful of customers in Atlanta. But Pemberton had something else, a name. His bookkeeper and business partner, Frank M. Robinson, suggested the name Coca-Cola. Robinson believed the two C's would look good in advertising, and then he wrote the name in the distinctive Spencerian script that would eventually become one of the most recognizable logos in the world. That detail matters, because from the beginning, Coca-Cola was not only a beverage, it was an advertising idea. The product needed customers, and the fastest way to create them was not simply to make a better drink, it was to make people remember the name. The first newspaper advertisement appeared in Atlanta. It described Coca-Cola as a refreshing beverage. Signs began appearing around the city. The name was painted onto awnings. The word drink was placed beside it. The message was simple: drink Coca-Cola. But the business was still fragile. John Pemberton himself would never see what Coca-Cola would become. He gradually sold portions of his interest to different partners. Then, in 1888, Pemberton died. The inventor of Coca-Cola was gone, and the future of the drink passed into the hands of someone who understood something Pemberton never fully managed to exploit. That man was Asa Griggs Candler. Candler was an Atlanta businessman and pharmacist. He began acquiring rights and interests connected to Coca-Cola. And unlike Pemberton, Candler understood that the most important ingredient might not be the syrup. It might be distribution, because a great drink that nobody knew about was still just a drink. Candler began pushing Coca-Cola aggressively. He used coupons to encourage people to try it. He promoted branded calendars, fans, clocks, serving equipment, and other promotional objects. The name appeared everywhere. The idea was revolutionary in its simplicity. Give people something they could see. Give them a reason to try it, then give them a reason to remember it. Advertising turned a local soda fountain product into a recognizable brand. Coca-Cola servings increased from about 1 million in 1890 to 100 million by 1900, and the drink was being sold throughout the United States and Canada. But there was still a problem. People could only drink Coca-Cola where soda fountains existed. The answer was the bottle. In 1899, Benjamin Thomas and Joseph Whitehead acquired the rights to bottle Coca-Cola, creating a distribution system that allowed the drink to travel far beyond Atlanta. A soda fountain was fixed in one location. A bottle could travel, sit in a store, ride on a train, and be opened anywhere. Coca-Cola could now move with the customer. But if Coca-Cola was going to become a national brand, it needed to look the same everywhere. In 1915, the Root Glass Company developed the famous Contour bottle. Its unusual shape became instantly recognizable, turning the bottle itself into part of the brand. Now Coca-Cola had a memorable name, a recognizable logo, an iconic bottle, and a distribution system capable of moving the product across enormous distances. But its most powerful ingredient was advertising. Coca-Cola began attaching itself to ordinary moments, a drink after work, with friends, at lunch, or during a celebration. The product was no longer presented simply as medicine, but as an everyday experience. Pemberton had started with a medicinal tonic. Coca-Cola was becoming an everyday pleasure. Then came Robert Woodruff. Woodruff became president in 1923 and pushed Coca-Cola toward national and international expansion. The company built bottling plants, transportation networks, distribution agreements, advertising systems, and retail relationships. The drink had become a system. By 1930, Coca-Cola was being bottled in 27 countries. Global expansion created a new challenge. The brand had to become culturally flexible while remaining recognizable. Coca-Cola increasingly connected itself with universal experiences such as refreshment, friendship, celebration, and optimism. And then came Christmas. Coca-Cola did not invent Santa Claus, but beginning in 1931, it commissioned illustrator Haddon Sundblom to create Santa imagery for its Christmas campaigns. His paintings helped popularize the warm, cheerful version of Santa that became familiar to generations. Coca-Cola was no longer simply selling a drink. It was placing itself inside cultural rituals. A bottle associated with Christmas, childhood, friendship, summer, or celebration became more than a beverage. It became emotional, but beneath the cheerful advertising was a complicated history. The original drink contained coca leaf extract, during a period when cocaine was legally available and widely discussed in medicine and commerce. As the United States moved toward tighter regulation, Coca-Cola faced increasing scrutiny. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 changed the environment surrounding food and drug claims, and the company later fought a major federal case concerning caffeine. Then came World War II. Coca-Cola committed to supplying the drink to American servicemen. Bottling operations appeared wherever American forces were stationed, and the drink became associated with home, a familiar taste in an unfamiliar world. The war also helped Coca-Cola expand internationally. As American forces moved around the world, the company's distribution network followed. After the war, Coca-Cola was positioned to become an even more international brand. By the middle of the 20th century, Coca-Cola was no longer simply an American soda. It was becoming a symbol of America itself. Its greatest advertising insight was simple. People did not need to understand the ingredients. They needed to understand the feeling. A family, friends, a picnic, a beach, a celebration. The drink became a prop in a story about life. This became the foundation of modern lifestyle advertising, and Coca-Cola became one of its greatest practitioners. By the 1960s and 1970s, television transformed advertising. In 1971, Coca-Cola released one of its most famous campaigns, bringing young people from different countries together and presenting Coca-Cola as a symbol of unity. The product itself was almost secondary. The real product was togetherness. A bottle of soda could not solve political conflict or eliminate cultural differences, but advertising could make that bottle symbolize the desire for connection. Coca-Cola had become extraordinarily good at symbolism. Then came Pepsi. By the 1980s, the rivalry between Coca-Cola and Pepsi had become a battle over identity. Young versus established, traditional versus modern, classic versus rebellious. Then, in 1985, Coca-Cola changed its original formula and introduced New Coke. The reaction was immediate. Consumers protested, letters arrived, and people began collecting old Coca-Cola bottles and cans. The company had underestimated something fundamental. Coca-Cola was not merely a flavor. It had become an emotional object. People had grown up with it and attached memories to it. Changing the formula felt like changing part of their lives. Coca-Cola eventually brought back the original formula as Coca-Cola Classic. New Coke became one of the most famous marketing mistakes in history, but strangely, the failure strengthened the original brand. The public reminded Coca-Cola that the value of a brand does not always live in the product. Sometimes it lives inside the customer's memory. Coca-Cola entered the late 20th century as a global cultural giant, but the world was changing again. Consumers became more concerned about health. Sugar was increasingly scrutinized, and soft drinks faced criticism over calorie consumption. Coca-Cola responded by expanding its portfolio into water, diet drinks, juices, energy drinks, and other beverages. The company was no longer dependent on one drink. It had become a massive beverage system. Yet the original Coca-Cola remained at the center. And the modern story is full of contradictions. Coca-Cola sells one of the world's most famous sugary beverages while operating in an era increasingly concerned about sugar. It markets happiness while facing questions about environmental impact, water use, packaging waste, labor, and corporate influence. Its global reach is one of its greatest achievements, and also one of the reasons it receives so much scrutiny. Coca-Cola is no longer simply an American story, it is a global one. Perhaps the most fascinating part is how little John Pemberton understood what he had created. He died before Coca-Cola became a global empire. He could not have imagined the contour bottle, television commercials, international distribution, or Coca-Cola becoming a symbol of Christmas. And yet, everything traces back to that moment in Atlanta. A pharmacist had a problem. His alcoholic product was threatened by prohibition, so he experimented. He created a syrup, carried it down the street, and someone mixed it with carbonated water. A customer tasted it, and the world quietly changed. There was no grand opening ceremony, no dramatic announcement, just a 5-cent drink at a pharmacy. That is often how history works. The things that eventually transform the world rarely look important when they begin. Coca-Cola survived changing attitudes toward alcohol and cocaine, government scrutiny, two world wars, economic crises, television, and even its own disastrous attempt to replace its formula. Through all of it, the red and white identity remained. That is not simply the power of a recipe. It is the power of repetition, memory, distribution, and above all, storytelling. Coca-Cola taught the modern world something countless companies would later imitate. People do not always buy products because they need them. Sometimes they buy the meaning attached to them. A bottle can become a memory. A logo can become familiar. A taste can transport someone across decades in a single second. And that may be Coca-Cola's greatest achievement. It turned a beverage into a cultural object. The first Coca-Cola customers in Atlanta probably had no idea what they were participating in. They were simply thirsty. They walked into a pharmacy, paid 5 cents, received a glass of carbonated sweetness, and went on with their lives. But inside that ordinary transaction was the beginning of something extraordinary. A product that would eventually be served billions of times. A brand recognized across the planet. A drink whose history would stretch from 19th century pharmacists and prohibition laws to modern global advertising. The history of Coca-Cola is therefore much more than the history of a soft drink. It is the history of modern consumer culture in miniature. It shows how science can become commerce, how commerce can become advertising, how advertising can become culture, and how culture can turn an ordinary object into something people feel they know personally. The next time you see a Coca-Cola bottle, it is easy to see only a drink. But that bottle carries more than liquid. It carries more than a century of experimentation, regulation, marketing, transportation, competition, war, globalization, and memory. It began with a pharmacist trying to reinvent his product before prohibition could destroy it. It survived its creator, its controversies, and its mistakes, and it became something its inventor could never have imagined. A drink that was almost illegal became a drink almost everyone recognizes. Coca-Cola did not become powerful because it was the first drink of its kind. It became powerful because, over generations, it learned how to make an ordinary drink feel like a small part of an extraordinary life. And once a product becomes part of people's memories, you are no longer simply selling a beverage, you are selling history. Coca-Cola began with 9 drinks a day. Today, the Coca-Cola system reports serving billions of drinks every day across more than 200 countries and territories. The distance between those two numbers is the real story. Not the recipe, not the bottle, not even the logo. The real story is how a tiny experiment in an Atlanta pharmacy became one of the most recognizable commercial ideas humans have ever created. And it all started because, for one brief moment, alcohol was becoming illegal. If you enjoyed this story and want to discover more fascinating stories behind the world's biggest brands, make sure to subscribe. There are plenty more stories coming. Stories of ambition, failure, innovation, and the moments that changed the world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.